The word manipulation is a problem because people think, oh, you're manipulating somebody. But when the difference between manipulation and good psychology has always been, to me, your intent. Is your intent to get your way, or is your intent to develop your relationship, which he wants, because he obviously married you or is with you? When your intent is to do something that will make everybody happier, then that's psychology.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Fascinating Womanhood channel, where we talk about everything that has to do with femininity and building strong, long-lasting, loving relationships. I am Cherry Lynn, and I'm here with my mom, Dixie Andelin Forsyth. Hi.
Hi.
Today we are talking about how women influence men. We've had a few questions about this over the last couple of years. Some of the questions basically sound like, what do you mean by influencing men? Because there's a quote from your book that says, when we influence a man for the better, we invite him to access and develop the great potential that is already there in him. And someone asked, what does that mean? What do you mean by influence? And we thought that's an interesting question. We should kind of talk about that. And it turned into this, us doing a video on it. So do you want to talk a little bit about the word influence? Because
okay.
I think everyone has a different idea of what that means probably in their head.
All of us influence people around them, whether we want to or not. We do, by our very personalities, our characters, our natures. The question is, do we want to influence them for good or for bad? Now, influence is very different than manipulation, because influence is something that people see in you that they want to be like, whether it's good or bad. So it has nothing, if someone says, I want to influence my husband to be a better provider, for example, you're just putting another word in there to mean I want to try to control him, or say something or do something that gets him to do what I want. Influence is something that you have on a person without even knowing it. For instance, if you are always a person who is a cranky, grumpy, that will influence people to either be more careful around you. You're not necessarily wanting this response, but it still has an influence on people. If you're a person who is always kind, always warm, you will tend to attract more people to you. And you're not necessarily trying to do it, but that you have an influence on people. Easiest way for me to understand it and to explain it is, how have our parents influenced us?
And past generations, yes.
Yeah. Is your family, did you come from a family where parents just assumed you're going to get an education? Right. Or do they assume you're not? Like some parents, because I helped Bob in some of his clinics, I wasn't exposed to this in my life, but some patients have told me that their family expected them, because everyone in their family always ends up serving jail time. Well, that isn't something that was an influence in my family, and I'm really grateful for that. But some people have that in their family history, where Uncle Joe and Uncle so-and-so and Aunt so-and-so, they all did these crimes and they all served jail time. So that has an influence on children. That doesn't mean they have to do it, but the tendency to do that starts getting passed around and passed on. So we're talking about being a feminine influence on men and how that can help them.
It's interesting. On Wikipedia, the definition of influence is the capacity to have an effect on the character development or behavior of someone or something, or the effect of itself. So it's affecting or changing someone or something in direct, but usually important in an important way. And I think it's interesting that it says that about change, because I think that's exactly kind of the opposite of what we're trying to say here, is that you're not trying to do it to change someone. It's basically changing people. When you influence a man for the better, like what we're talking about, you're doing it in a more, what's the right word?
By example.
You're doing it by example, but not because you want that result. And I think when you talk about that in Wikipedia, how it says something to affect or change someone, there's a problem with that, because that can become manipulative, and that has, like you say this all the time, strings attached.
Yeah, and first of all, it doesn't work. We say that often in Fascinating Womanhood. Why would you do something that can't work? Forget about it. But the other problem is our language. The
Mhm.
word influence doesn't mean just one thing, just like the word love does. So when they have that definition, that is true with certain things. In science, it can be true. This influenced this outcome.
Right.
You see what I mean? So the word is a problem. You have
Right.
to define what part of that word you mean in this instance, and that's what we're doing.
Yes, and that's why we're spending a lot of time talking about that word because so many people look at it differently. We had a lady the other day that said, well, my husband wants to move our family to this place that I don't want to go. How can I influence him not to?
How can
And
I
I had a problem with that word because I was like, well,
Yeah.
it sounds like you're trying to find a way out of this to change him, and that's not the solution here.
We'll have a home, darling.
What kind of a home when your work takes you all those places? Colorado, Montana,
All right, then.
Idaho.
All right, we won't go to Colorado. I'll get another job.
Oh, no, I didn't mean that. This is a wonderful chance for you. Anyway, it'll always be something like that. If it isn't a tunnel in Colorado, it'll be a bridge in Alaska or a dam across the Pacific.
I didn't
Something
know that
off
you felt-
somewhere.
We're talking about influence, what happens when you do it negatively, and the power of positive influence.
Right, because we all have influence on people around us our entire lives. We're just not even always aware of what kind of influence. Like you may influence somebody that you never meet, that you never talk to dress better just by the way you dress going to the grocery store every time you go. And that
That's
same
true.
checker will see you. You'll never have any idea that you influence that person to do their hair blonde,
That's true.
wear better clothes. So a lot of the influence that we have, like if my mother was here, she wouldn't really know how much when I talk about how she's influenced me because I didn't say it.
Right.
But she and my dad and my siblings, my aunts and uncles, they all had an influence on me that I didn't recognize at the time. So we're talking about the feminine influence you can have and do have on a man, and making sure that it's positive instead of negative.
Because we discussed this before we filmed, and we came to 3 points that we thought would be really important to share about influence. Before we jump into these 3 points, I did want to ask, just because this comes up a lot, and I'm sure people watching might be thinking the same thing, is it fake for women to be doing this if they are trying to see change in their husbands? Is this watching this and saying, oh, I watched this video about influence and I want to influence my husband? Is that fake for them to learn how to influence for the better?
Well, they're going to soon find out that when they influence for the better, they work on themselves. Then they're kind of tricking themselves if they think they're doing something to manipulate or use another person. The word manipulation is a problem because people think, oh, you're manipulating somebody. But when the difference between manipulation and good psychology has always been, to me, your intent. Is your intent to get your way, or is your intent to develop your relationship, which he wants, because he obviously married you or is with you? When your intent is to do something that will make everybody happier, then that's psychology. And you could say, well, moving to this place is going to be good for everybody. You can trick yourself into thinking it isn't manipulation.
We came to 3 points that we thought would be really important to share about influence. Before we jump into these 3 points, I did want to ask, just because this comes up a lot, and I'm sure people watching might be thinking the same thing, is it fake for women to be doing this if they are trying to see change in their husbands? Is this watching this and saying, oh, I watched this video about influence and I want to influence my husband? Is that fake for them to learn how to influence for the better?
Well, they're going to soon find out that when they influence for the better, they work on themselves. Then they're kind of tricking themselves if they think they're doing something to manipulate or use another person. The word manipulation is a problem because people think, oh, you're manipulating somebody. But when the difference between manipulation and good psychology has always been, to me, your intent. Is your intent to get your way, or is your intent to develop your relationship, which he wants, because he obviously married you or is with you? When your intent is to do something that will make everybody happier, then that's psychology. And you could say, well, moving to this place is going to be good for everybody. You can trick yourself into thinking it isn't manipulation. If he wants something and you try to get him to change, that's more manipulation.
First of all, the kind of a trailer that you're thinking about probably cost a fortune. Now, you know what our budget is for the first year. Travel, honeymoon. Here it is. Rent.
I know, $1,700. All right. Now, for only $100 more, do you know what we could have?
What this boils down to, what I'm hearing you say, is that working on your influence, you don't really work on it. You work on your character, and influence is a positive result of you working on your character.
You can have a great influence on him when you understand him. Once you do, this is a very powerful thing that women can develop. And if you use it for bad, because you can, because women, I mean, you've seen throughout, I mean, if you ever watch crime shows or anything, women can absolutely get men to do all kinds of things.
Right.
But if it's for bad, it's going to come back on you. It's not going to be good in the long
What
run.
do you think is an example of a negative feminine influence?
A guy is, say, just totally crazy about his woman, and she uses that to get him to either, I'm going to say something that is not really criminal, to get into more debt. I really, really want this, and she knows he has a weakness for getting her anything. I really, really want this, and then it ends up getting into debt that they cannot handle. I really want this vacation. I really want this thing, and if you don't do this for me, I'm not going to treat you very well.
1950. Oh, let's get it, Nikki, please.
What?
I'll save. I promise. I won't spend a cent on anything again as long as I live. Only I just want to have this for our home. Honey, we could do it, couldn't we? We wouldn't have to pay any rent. I'll cook all of our meals. Honest, I will. We won't have to go to any restaurants or hotels. Honey, there won't be any bellboys to bother us and no tips. We just think of the money that we could save on our honeymoon alone.
I'm gonna maybe withhold sex or just all kinds of things that women do, then it's gonna come back on you. It always does. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to avoid doing things that don't work anyway.
Okay, so let's jump into our 3 points about influence.
Mhm.
Number 1.
Your character. You influence somebody by your honesty, your lack of honesty, anything to do with character. You're following through on your commitments, your work ethic. All of that is a character. And when you are somebody who has a good, strong character, that really influences your man. It'll influence him. Like, I am so happy that my wife does what she says and follows through. Not just things like that, but things like kind, understanding, patient. That's a good one, because we all need to work on that all the time. At least I do. Patience, long suffering, all those kinds of things. When a good man is married to a woman like that, he gains a lot of respect, and that will have an influence on him.
No, I'm far too outspoken. It's one of my worst faults.
You were right. I don't know my children.
There's still time, Captain. They want so much to be close to you.
When you brought music back into the house, I'd forgotten.
And I think this one, you've said this several times, we gentle, feminine women, gentle, masculine men. I think this is a big one for that, is like how gentle you are. Your character and what's inside, like you said, it does impact him whether you see it or not.
You may not even notice it. You may not realize how much it impacts him, but it does. Number 1, it includes self-restraint, your morals, self-esteem, your boundaries, accepting him at face value. All of this is character. A man loves when he feels like he's married someone he kind of doesn't deserve, that he feels lucky. That makes a man feel kind of like he's won. Mm-hmm. When he marries somebody, he feels like, well, I can't believe I got to marry that person. That is one way you have a great influence. And you might think, oh, gosh, that takes too long. It's a lifetime thing, but it is. But even improvements make a difference as you're even working on it. You don't have to become some perfect person, because you're not going to ever get there in your life. I don't know anyone who has. Okay, then the next one, number 2, is your surface, how you are on the surface, what your mannerisms are, your language, your tone. Are you polite? Are you rude? Do you have a big temper?
Yeah, I think this one's really hard for some women. You know, we had that video that we did, Unlearning Masculine Behaviors, and it has a lot of views. And I think of that video when I think about this one, because a lot of our ladies do struggle with how they move. And we did that video on feminine speech, the way you speak and the way you move, it has influence over other people. You may not realize it, but this goes big into the swearing one too. A lot of women struggle with swearing, and they say that it's something that they've always done, but it impacts everyone around you. It influences everyone around you, and you may not realize it. And think about when you're around somebody that's rude, like you said earlier, or crass or abrasive. You're around those people. It does influence you, whether you realize it or not. Some more than others.
Well, or dirty jokes, things like that. We all know that when a person in public life, a politician, for example, if they do it, they're always horrified. And I think, well, a lot of those people probably do it all over the place in their private life. It's not charming. It's not attractive. It does influence, and it does not influence for positive. Well, here's an example, and this is Bob, but he always, some of you know, he always dresses up when he goes to the hospital. That has an influence on people because some of the patients, especially in this children's unit, and I don't mean little kids, I mean like teens and stuff, they sometimes think that he is like some high-powered political leader. Where some of the doctors that wear Birkenstocks to work and a rumpled shirt and those cargo pants with tons of pockets it's always wrinkly because you can't ever iron those things. They have more respect for him. He's like, oh, who's that?
But in terms of a woman and a man, like in a marriage, how does a woman influence a man by the way she dresses? Like, what do you think the influence is that she has with her husband?
If she practices self-care as opposed to what we call pizza clothes and poor self-esteem kind of way of dressing, he's going to treat her with, first of all, men are very visual. He's going to find himself more attracted to her. He's going to feel more respect. And that's an influence. It doesn't mean you're influencing him to do something you want. But all those positive influences will go in that direction of a better relationship, which means you'll be happier, you'll be more satisfied in all aspects of your relationship.
I agree. And I think if you're going to start doing this because you're hoping for better results, that's not the point. The point is that you work on yourself. And like we said earlier, and the result is that you might see that you have a positive influence on those around you, which could be good.
You will have one. You'll have to maybe sometimes have to look for it, the results, but you will have a
and
positive.
If you don't get it, that's fine too, because that's not why you're doing it. You're doing it yourself.
Right.
Okay, and the last one.
The choices you make, and we put under there financial spending, general lifestyle choices such as diet, exercise, hobbies, self-care, all of that. And all of that also kind of points back to character, what kind of a person you are. Or, do you take care of your responsibilities?
To me, these 3 points are what's inside of you, what's outside of you, and the choices that you make. And I think that it's easy to remember it in that way. But with the choices, it's tough because the choices are affected by the other two. So the choices that you make are affected by...
It's like a big circle. It's like a big circle.
It's like it goes round and round. And I think, if you're really working on your character, you're bound to make better choices, right? Like they all kind of connect. But I think the reason why we wanted to separate it in that way is because the choice thing is just so big. It's such a big subject, especially when you're talking about financials. I know that's I think the number one thing that people fight about. If you Google it, it's like the number one thing that couples fight about is finances. And I think you as a woman, and if you're upset about finances, or if you don't agree about things with finances, like the choices that you're making, whether you're saving, whether you're not saving, those all have an influence on your family and your guy. And the constant arguing over finances to me says that you're just not on the same page probably about finances. And you as a woman, you can't force him to have the same idea as you do about finances. You can't. And some women are in charge of finances, some men are in charge. But if you're not on the same page, what can you do as the woman to influence the situation? Not manipulate the situation, but influence. How are you with money? How are you with those things? And it's not just finance. It could be, we're just using that as an example.
This isn't always all about this one subject. You do have an influence, but there's many other areas of Fascinating Womanhood that can kind of come into play with different things. If your husband is a serial killer, you're probably not going to get him to stop. So we're saying something extreme. There's sometimes you have to have boundaries, and you may have to say, I can't do this. But in normal situations, which most of us by far are in, you have an influence on him, and happily we can change ourselves. We can do
Right.
it all day long. We can't change him. What you can do is, and we didn't include it on the list, but understanding him. Learn to, like you were mentioning about finances, learning to understand him, why he takes this position on financing, on spending, or things, the choices that he makes versus the choices you make.
Mickey, what are you thinking about? What are you thinking about?
I was wondering how the heck they're gonna get this trailer out of here.
Why does he do it? Is it because he never had anything growing up, and so he just really, this or that is really important to him? Buying camping supplies is really important to him because he never got to do that. If he feels understood, it's easier for him to understand you, if that makes any sense, because it's just a principle. It's true.
Absolutely. I think one of the things we were talking about when we were discussing filming this, was the classic example of the power of the yawn, the contagious yawn, and remember how we were talking about that? And the power of the sneeze too. I think there's like a thing where the power of suggestion, where you suggest like, don't sneeze, whatever you do, don't sneeze. And then everybody sneezes. Or the yawn, when you see somebody yawning and they yawn. I think there's a whole science behind that. And I was actually reading about how that, I was like, is yawning really contagious? And I thought,
Yeah.
that was
even talking about it kind of makes you start feeling like you need to yawn.
and it's silly to bring that up because we're talking about such deep things, but it's really very similar. If you're having a hard time grasping this whole concept, it's just like when you see someone yawn and you yawn. It's kind of amazing how much influence you have over people like that. You know, when you're talking about choices, I think that's what made me think about the yawning, is that, you know, if you're going shopping and you're like, let's go buy a bunch of stuff, and you just start spending, you know, are you influencing your husband to want to spend more money? I don't know. And you don't even really realize it.
Or influencing him to put more of a wall around him, a wall of reserve that we talk about in other stuff, and think, I feel uncomfortable because I feel like we can't afford this, and that makes him tense.
Right. That's a good point, is the mood that you have. We didn't really put that in here. I think that would probably fall under the first one, what's inside of you. The mood that you bring, everybody knows this. I mean, I think, like, the power of positivity. Everyone knows the power of a smile and the influence that has. But if he tells you some bad news and you react stressed or you react poorly, how is that going to influence him to not only share more things with you, like you mentioned with the wall? He might not want to share some things with you. He might his wall might get higher because he's like, well, last time I gave you this news, you kind of...
Where were you planning for us to live?
In a house, like human beings. Something that is fastened to the ground, that doesn't quiver every time you take a step.
I think you're terrible.
Huh?
You have a tremendous amount of influence
You do.
all the time that you probably aren't even aware of. It's something that I feel like I'm constantly trying to learn.
And that's a great example of how you can influence somebody for the positive. And you're not doing it to influence them. You're doing it so that your relationship is better. It's all relationship oriented.
Right.
And also so you can, like, if he tells you something that's not the best news and you handle it well, it'll help you, obviously. Right. And it'll help him to be able to handle it more calmly and feel like there's a positive, that we can find a solution for this, or
right.
we can get through this. All of it, it's all together. And so that's the whole point of us talking about influence, is we have influence on people every day of our lives. Let's just do it in a more proactive, positive way.
I agree. Yeah, this is a big subject. I think we could go on. And if you have any questions specifically about it out there, we would love to hear them, because this is a big subject and there could be a million ways you could slice it up. So if you have any questions for us, we would love to answer them. We'd love to address them or speak about it further in another video. So thank you so much for sharing these tips with us. It's been really, really nice to talk about this today.
Yeah.
And thank you everyone for watching. We have links attached to this video to purchase Dixie's books and her workbooks. We also have some new products that you should definitely check out if you haven't already. We have a new edition of your book, that has just come out.
Well, it's not just a cover. It has an index. The other one doesn't have an index.
It doesn't have an index, and this one has a beautiful cover, so should definitely check that out. I'll attach it to the video. And we also have a love journal that came out in February, just a couple months ago. Check that out if you haven't already. And we're here every week, so don't forget to check back with us next week, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Yeah.